أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيبنا وصفينا أبو القاسم محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم الحمد لأهله والصلاة على أهلها والسلام على من اتبع الهدى أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله ta'ala wa barakatuh. The attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, these are the abstractions that can be marked or that can be abstracted through the intellectual comparisons between the creator, which is the necessary existence, and the creations, which is the possible existence. So the relationship that is in between the two, this is what marks and this is what establishes the attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if there is the relationship that has to be marked between the creator and the creation, the relationship that is there, this is what marks and this is what brings the comparison between the two, which makes us to have the realization of the attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This relationship that is between God and the creation, this is the relationship which we can call or simplify to be the bilateral relationship that brings forth the concept and the idea of creating. If this relationship is not taken into consideration or it is not understood very well, then the concept of creating is going to be absent between the two beings, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the creations or the creature. So the concept of creating comes in with this relationship, which can easily be transformed or can be called to be the bilateral relationship that is between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and his creations. There are so many bilateral relationships that we can draw or that we can pay heed or attention of between God and his creatures. But a very good and a very simple example of these relationships is forgiveness. Forgiveness, this has to come divinely from lordship or the divinity of lordship. It is Allah who has to forgive, and the transgressions of this forgiveness has to come from the servants. So you can see the relationships that are there. For example, if one person asks for forgiveness, if you out there, you ask for forgiveness, Ya Allah, forgive me for all these things that I've been doing or for all these things that I've done. When you ask for forgiveness, the issue of this legislation, which is inside forgiveness that you are asking about, has to come from the necessary existence, which is Allah Tabarak wa Ta'ala. And the transgression of this forgiveness, meaning what? The one that has to be forgiven is a servant of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And who is that servant? That servant is the creature of the creator. So we can see the concept of lordship there and the concept of servantship that is there. This is the relationship. As already been indicated and as already been said and as already been mentioned, it is well understood that the actualization of the attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, putting the action of the attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this has the connection to have its return to the origin. And what is the origin? The origin is the attributes of essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning that sometimes the attributes of action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which can be said to be between Allah and His creatures can be retained to the attributes of essence. For example, when we say that the Creator has got power to create, there is a point of power inside the Creator here. He has got power to create. This brings us back to the attribute of essence, which is power. He is powerful. Power is within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and power is the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we say that the Creator has got power to create something, the Creator has got power to bring something into existence, what we necessarily mean is that this Creator, who is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the power is within His essence. So we can see the relationship here now between the attribute of action and the attribute of essence. Power, which makes Him to have the ability to create something. And this ability is His power that is within His essence. Sometimes the attribute of hearing and seeing is considered to be the attribute of knowledge. This is knowledge. Knowledge is within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this can be mentioned to say this is the knowledge of audible and visible. Why do we say that? We say that because the knowledge of hearing, seeing is within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is within Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. So we can see the relationship of an action and the relationship of an essence that is within Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This makes us realize, and this makes us come into our senses to say that Allah is the beginning of everything without any limitations. If we can say that the relationship that is between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His creatures is a bilateral relationship, that makes us understand that this relationship is unlimited relationship on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the action that is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to His creation is unlimited. But the action that is with the creation, the creatures of these Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is limited. Why? Because it depends upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It depends upon the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can sometimes return to the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It must be noted, however, that when the relationship between God and the creatures or the creations is abstracted, it is limited between time and space. But this limitation is only on the side of the material existence, which is the creatures, which is the creation of this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not on the other side, not on the side of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not limited with time and space. That goes beyond the existence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It goes beyond the essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, in our mind, it might seem or it might look to be something that is materialistic. Some people might say that we are trying to apply this material formation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is time and space. No, we are not applying it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that one is only limited to the material side, to the other side, which is the possible existence. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it goes beyond that, and it is far beyond time and space. From all what has been mentioned and from all what has been talked about, we can draw an understanding that the attributes of action can only be limited to the material existence. And with the necessary existence, we really understand that there is no limitation of time and space. We draw an attention to get some of the attributes which can be said to be the three attributes of action. Number one, this is the attribute of action which is called the khaliqiyya. that can be said to be the attribute of action of creatorship. Number two, the attribute of action which is called the rububiyya, that can be said to be the attribute of action of lordship. And number three, the attribute of action called the uluhiyya, which is divinity. When we understand these attributes of actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we place the gap that is between Allah and His creatures. For example, when we get the first one, which is the khaliqiyya, creatorship, Allah is the creator, can be applied only to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He is the creator. There is a relationship between the creator and the creatures. So we really understand, and it brings us to an understanding that Allah, He is the creator. The ability of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to create cannot be compared to the ability of a human being to create. Though sometimes this word creation can be used at times where it is simplified, limited to space and time. But all in all, we have to understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a creator. He is the creator. Without limitation, without space, without time. The second one, which is the rububiyya, lordship, we have to understand and we have to draw an understanding that it is only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through His power, which is within His essence, that it is He who is worthy to be the Lord. He is the Lord. He is the one that bestows the existence to other creatures. We understand it with that way. And when we go to the third attribute of action, which is the uluhiyya, divinity, Allah is the only being that is worthy to be worshipped. Why? Because the relationship that is there results to give Him the position to be the necessary existence and worthy to be worshipped, the Lord, the Creator, and divinely being. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما